Yeah, so I'm the creator of Coach Glassman's methodology. You want to hear something really weird? Somehow, friends of mine ended up in charge at NIH and Health and Human Services. Yeah, it's... I don't know what to make of that. It doesn't fill me with incredible hope. I don't know how you go to approach a job like that when you've made it pretty clear you think the whole thing should be taken apart. So I guess probably you have to pretend like that's not what you want to do. I don't know. I don't know how they're going to do it. But I'm glad I'm not any closer than I am to that. I don't have a lot of hope for public health. And, but I started Coach Glassman's methodology not thinking that everyone in the world was going to get fit. I never had any ill-conceived perceptions along those lines. But what I did know is that anyone that I could remain exposed to, give me 3 days a week, and whether they believe it's going to happen or not, if they keep coming, and I get in their ear, I can bring them health. And I also believe that anyone else could do that too. A whole bunch of you did, and thank you for that. So that was pretty straightforward. The MetFix, the deal is this. Here's the bottom line, and it's weird that you don't hear this from anyone, and I'm not sure who cares outside of us, but the standard accepted parameterization of health in Western medicine, the things that Sheta was talking about, like blood pressure and triglyceridemia and all those kinds of things, those are treated as though they are independent variables. And the effort is to tweak those to give you health. And they are, in fact, each of the standard parameters, they're either diagnostically all you need to say you got chronic disease, there's a blood pressure that you're chronically diseased. They are harbingers of other chronic diseases, even where the mechanism may not be completely understood, or they are causal themselves of chronic disease. But in each and every case, they don't sit as independent variables. Ultimately, they are the dependent variables of some lifestyle choices. And what makes this complicated for everyone is that the doctor's bag doesn't include seeing you 3 times a week, probably. That's a lot of doctor visits, right? And that's the minimum. That's kind of what I need. There's a big difference if someone comes 2 days a week or 1 day a week. I had a guy who came 1 day a week for 10 years. And I would have to kick the shit out of him so hard to get a week's worth of exercise. And I'd tell him, George, if you just come 1 more day, it'd be a third as hard. He goes, I think you're trying to kill me. And I said, I'm trying to make you a non-sedentary person in 1 hour each week. And it's a rough thing to do. But the tools are different. The amount of attention is different. It's a tough place to be. And so I have tremendous admiration for what you're doing in this integration. And it's unknown turf. We just know that it works, and you're apparently making it work and expanding, so God bless you on that. So outside of that, look, these are dependent variables of lifestyle choices, and we've identified sedentarism, and it is too much time on the couch, and excessive consumption of refined carbohydrate. Let's pick on fructose if we got to go down some road. With that, I ask, why is it trouble getting the message out? What's the problem in the communication of this? And I've become kind of I've taken my dad's role, we used to call him the science bear. And I've told Emily, I'm the philosopher in chief of this effort here. But I've turned my attention to science that won't replicate. And I wonder who here has heard of the replication crisis? Give me a show of hands if you have. Almost all of you, right? Is anybody who's never heard that term? And that's okay if you have. Yeah, there's a big chunk of science that won't replicate, and it includes all of the social sciences. It's where we find primary research, and the bummer about it is that medicine's been affected, and that there are big chunks of whole fields of medical research that wouldn't replicate, including preclinical oncology and hematology, and one glorious effort to reproduce 46 landmark studies, I think it was, by Begley and Ellis, and only less than 11%, I think it was. Do I have my numbers right? it's so appalling it doesn't matter whether it was 5% or 10. This stuff won't replicate. And to make matters worse, we don't know to this day which of these landmark studies in oncology and hematology wouldn't replicate. And one of them has been cited 5,000 times since being found to not actually be replicatable science. And I had a keen interest in that because the Coach Glassman's methodology probably comes from my father's insistence on homeschooling me in science. Homeschooled, no, I still went to school, but when I came home, I got homeschooled. And it wouldn't let up, and it was relentless. And I owe him a lot for that. Because what I did is I applied what he taught me about observations and turning them into measurements, and then from measurements creating a model that has predictive strength, and it validates through that predictive strength. That view of science allowed me to posit that constantly varied high-intensity functional movement would increase work capacity across broad time and modal domains, which is the primary theorem of the Coach Glassman's methodology, and that'll never not be funny to me. And what was behind that, and what was interesting is I had a lot of critics, a lot of naysayers, but I've never had anyone challenge constantly varied high-intensity functional movement will increase work capacity across broad time and modal domains. I never even had a critic ask me, what does you mean by that? Because I'm waiting to be asked. I've got an answer for you. I can draw it for you. I can graph it. I can give you all the details. But never got challenged once. And I found that interesting. But there was an academic response to CrossFit. And by the way, constantly varied high-intensity functional movement, increasing work capacity across broad time and modal domains, because we get to do this, we called the stimulus CrossFit, and we called the response fitness, and came up with the first quantifiable definition of fitness. The American College of Sports Medicine had a definition of fitness, and it's interesting, there were 37 items on it, and I could tell they passed the hat around. Everyone got to put one in. And there were only two things on the list that could be measured, and one of them was energy, and the other was power. And I don't think they meant it in the physical sense. So we'd have to grant them those two, but it looked clear because it was well-being, vitality, energy, and I don't think they're talking about the energy of physics when you see it listed like that. And so, what did that do? Well, it created a movement that gave me multi-generational wealth. Worked pretty good in my case, but when I looked around at the rest of the field and tried to see what's wrong, and I've done this now it started long before I got canceled and left the methodology started by Greg Glassman. I was keenly interested in science that wouldn't replicate after we had hired a bioethicist to help in our prosecution of the NSCA officials that felt so comfortable fabricating and falsifying data, then lying about it to a federal judge, then to a state judge, only for us to get the emails where we could see the whole conspiracy of the fabrication and falsification. And I had come to think that the problem in replication, the problem in the sciences was this corruption. That is, doing dishonest things, fabrication, falsification, plagiarism, and that kind of thing. But there's way more to it than that, and there's a bigger problem. And in fact, the problem of scientific misconduct, which is what that fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism entails, the problem is that corruption is preceded by a different kind of corruption, and it's an epistemic corruption. It's a corruption of methodology. And in fact, if you go to Wikipedia and look at the replication crisis, they refer to it as a methodological problem without ever giving any hints as to where the method went wrong. And the whole field, and there's a whole field of meta-science now, is trying to figure out what's going on, and they're doing it's the study of science using scientific methods. And so far it's been, I would say, perfectly fruitless. I think the problem stems in no small part because they're trying to talk about broken science without first defining what science is. And I think that's a big mistake. And even many of my allies, I see them, guys that I have immense respect for, like Janes and Stove and others, weren't working with a definition of science because it makes it much easier to see what the problem is when you have a piece you can work with. But in the end, looking at this and thinking about it, and I had a wonderful opportunity to speak at Hillsdale College in front of a bunch of students and faculty, and Larry Arnn invited us there, and very warm reception. It was a neat day. And I talked to these kids, and I tried to explain to them that when the determinant of validation becomes consensus rather than predictive strength of a model, science becomes nonsense, and that debasement epistemically creates an environment where the fraudsters come in and they come quickly and fast. And they go, you mean all I need is a peer-reviewed study, I need some good p-values, and a well-known professor or two to put into the study, that's all we got to do. And yeah, that's what you got to do. But the kids at Hillsdale didn't hear my message. And in fact, it was even after me saying that I'm talking about a variant of science that's unhealthy, that won't replicate this. The problem in science is probably the crown jewel of human thought, and they didn't hear it. And I thought, man, now I'm like my old man, because we'd all watch my old man talk at CrossFit health events about p-values, and everyone was like falling asleep. And so my challenge is that this material is, I think it's profound. And I think the profundity in part becomes because it's so important. I mean, people are literally dying because of bad science, right, in the end. Rigor Mortis is a wonderful book that covers that in tremendous detail across a whole bunch of fields. It just came to mind. Because he says on the cover that it's wasting trillions and costing the death of millions of people, this problem in the sciences. So I do the deep dive, and I come to see that profundity of it is not, we're not able to get that across yet. And the importance of it is clearly there, but it needs to be made accessible, the information. And if I can make it accessible, the profundity of it would even go to make it somewhat entertaining, because a lot of what we're going to talk about, and what I'm doing is I'm tipping my hand to this seminar that we're going to do in January, the test run in my gym in Scottsdale, Arizona. But I realized that we got to make this simpler, and where does this start? And then over time, because I'm homeschooling my kids, I came to see that the fix of the problem, and I'm not saying the fix is going to work, it would work for an individual, but maybe I don't see the whole of society doing this. But what we need is we need a repair to primary education. And I need to start with fourth graders. And I'm now working with my 6th and 7th time with the fourth graders, with my two that I'm putting my effort into. And I started just running the material by them, much like would need to be done for everybody. And I think I can do it. And I was going to share some of that with you here. And so one of the sections, and what I'm planning on doing is it's going to be 10 lectures over 2 days. I'm doing all of them, unfortunately. And I'm going to start with an introduction, and I'm going to work through to a definition of science. Just got an hour, including questions and a bathroom break. And then we're going to look at what's called the demarcation problem, what has historically been the demarcation from science and non-science, and how the academics really made the biggest mistake. I think it's the greatest unforced error in the history of intellectual thought, perhaps, and that's the falsification of Popper. And we're going to go next and look at David Stove and the rest of academic philosophy of science, and that's Popper, Kuhn, Feyerabend, and Lakatos, trying to roll through this here. And the next thing we're going to look at is conditional probability. And we're going to look at definitions, interpretations of probability, foundations of statistics, advances in inference, a new pantheon, some new heroes, and then at the end, where do we go from here? Now, the idea is I want to deliver in the course of a weekend seeds that plant a path and plan forward to learn this material so that you could render yourself fairly exempt from nonsense, from bullshit science. And along the way, I found something due to a friend, Roger Kimball, that I want to read to you. I hate to have to read to people, but I want to get this right. Larry Arnn would have memorized it. But this is Jason Alexander Smith, a dean at, John Alexander Smith, and he's a dean at Oxford talking to incoming students in 1914, okay, at Oxford. He says, gentlemen, it's too bad, I know. You are now about to embark upon a course of studies which will occupy you for 2 years. Together they form a noble adventure, but I'd like to remind you of an important point. Some of you, when you go down from the university, will go into the church or to the bar or to the House of Commons or to the Home Civil Service or the Indian or Colonial Service or into various professions. Some may go into the army, some into industry and commerce, some may become country gentlemen. A few, I hope a very few, will become teachers or dons. Let me make this clear to you. Except for those in that last category, nothing you will learn in the course of your studies will be of the slightest possible use to you in your life after, save only this, that if you work hard and intelligently, you should be able to detect when a man is talking rot. And that, in my view, is the main, if not the sole purpose of an education.
Well done.
Yeah. And I thought, you know something? I think we could put a path and plan forward to give just about anyone, starting with fourth grade kind of level expectations, we could give you the materials that would greatly increase the gain on your rot detection. And it was interesting that all my friends from CrossFit Health, all of them from around the world, from Fetke to Zoe Harcombe, Tim Noakes, all of us, Asim Malhotra, Malcolm Kendrick, without talking, we all knew what everyone's position would have been on the public health response to COVID. And when we talked, yep, and you know what it is? We got the rot detection thing figured out. You learn to listen more than skeptically at anything that comes from the CDC. It was so weird for me because I thought that, thank God we got the CDC, in case there's ever a big infectious disease, they're gonna be fucking heroes, right? It's just too bad they can't get chronic disease right. Then, it's like that. I used to think that Outside Magazine is weird. The two things I know about fitness and cycling, they always get wrong. But I read it because I don't know about those other things. And then one of their senior editors, he probably hate me for this, Lindsay Yacht, told me, no, we get everything wrong. There's the cycling's wrong, the mountain climbing's wrong, the skiing's wrong. And we know that the people that have Outside Magazine on their coffee table have a garage full of this shit and they don't ever use it. That's the audience, so it's your problem. I was like, wow. So, rot detection, can we do it? I'm gonna take just the conditional probability part, and I like it because it's rich, and I wanna make the point that fourth graders can do this. And I'll tell you what I did. I sat with my kids and I said, do you know the difference between the probability, and we had to kind of talk about that, means what do you think is going to happen, what are the odds, the chances, we had to play with the language, but they got it quickly, and I could give some real world examples. But I said, what do you think the probability is, given that you got an elephant, that he's got 4 legs? And my 11-year-old goes, it's an elephant? I go, yeah, it's a given. She goes, yeah, it's for sure it's got 4 legs. I go, you'd be fairly sure, right? Yeah. Okay, let's flip this around. I got an animal that's got 4 legs. You think it's highly probable that it's an elephant? And she's, no, it could be a mouse or a dog or a cat. That's dumb. And I go, wow, well, it's a fallacy. It's called confusion of the inverse, or the fallacy of transposed conditionals. And the probability of A given B has no obligation to lend any information of the probability of B given A all by itself. We need something else to get there. And so then we started playing with, well, if it's cloudy out, given that it's cloudy, is it probably going to rain? And my little boy says, most of the time it's cloudy, it doesn't rain. And yeah, so it doesn't seem real probable. How about this? Given that it's raining, is it probable that it's cloudy? Because it's always cloudy when it rains. I go, they're very different things, right? Yeah. I go, all right, let me draw you a picture of that. And then I told him there's a guy named Andrei Kolmogorov, who's kind of the father of modern day probability theory. And he suggested I think they call it a sigma space, and that you could take cloudy and you could take rain, and let's call this cloudy and call this rain. And he actually defined the probability of C, or let's go R given C, as, this was defined as the probability of the intersection divided by the probability of the conditionalized space. And so that's this area. In looking at the probability of it raining, given that it's cloudy, what we're saying is, knowing that you're in C, how likely is it that you're in R? And by the geometry of it, you can see it's not. There's a huge, vast area here of C that isn't R, right? If we look at the other way, the probability of it being cloudy versus raining. Now we're looking at that same, this is going to be the same thing. It's going to be C intersect R, which is, by the way, the same space. C intersect R and R intersect C are the same, right? We good still? Okay. And this is going to be divided by the probability of the rain. And so this time we're looking at what is the probability that it's cloudy out given that you're in the rain space, and almost all of it, right? So it has a high probability. And my kid is going, yeah, that's good, that's good. All right, if I can sensitize you to the issue of the inverse conditional, there's an amazing amount of misunderstanding and problem in the sciences and in jurisprudence that we can address immediately. In jurisprudence, it's the prosecutor's fallacy. And it's the assumption that the probability of the evidence given innocence suggests the probability of innocence given the evidence. And there's famous cases where people sadly have gone to jail for long periods of time only for it eventually to be revealed. This is a fallacious argument. It's a mistake. And if you look at prosecutor's fallacy, you can find conferences for litigators where this is discussed regularly. And it's been a problem with DNA evidence. It's been a problem. Someone went to jail for winning the lottery twice. And the argument was the odds of winning the lottery twice are 1 in millions, so the odds of doing it honestly are very remote. You can't do that. Just like the rain in the cloud and the elephant in the four-legged animal. It's just as bad a logic. Prosecutor's fallacy. We see this in diagnosis. Our newborn popped positive for cystic fibrosis with a test with a 95% sensitivity. We go to look at the positive predictive value of it. That is not the probability of testing positive given that you have cystic fibrosis, but what is the probability of cystic fibrosis having tested positive? And it depends on what method and where you look, but it's somewhere between 5 and 10%. I'm done. We're not gonna go down that road, right? This comes up again in p-values. The damn p-value. And what has happened is that the p-value it's the probability of the data on the assumption of the null being true held to an ad hoc chosen test statistic. You can get different p-values assuming different distributions. That is then turned around and presumed to be, even with statisticians saying, no, it doesn't mean that, it's still included and it's still interpreted and it's still taught to suggest that it's telling you something important about the probability of a hypothesis given the evidence. And it does not. It cannot. The deal is once we've assumed a hypothesis, we can't come to any conclusions about hypothesis. You've queered it already. And yet this happens over and over and over and over again. And it's not by accident. I brought the book with me. It's in my bag I left in the room. I'll have to hold it up just to share with everyone. But there was a single textbook that was in widespread use that actually offers up on its section on inference all of the, I don't want to pass this around. Everyone wants to see that. You know what that is, Michael? It's just pure bullshit. But I love it. It caught my eye. Looks like science, doesn't it? Yeah, you can imagine what it's doing, but it's not doing anything. It's AI, I'm almost certain. I think I know who made it, too. There was a textbook in use in 1975, and the author was a guy named Nunnally. I feel bad picking on him. He was caught, more flagrantly than others, and so he's heralded for this. But these are the things that in the space of 6 pages he says about p-values. And that is that a significance level of 5% means that the probability an observed difference is real. The improbability of observed results being due to error. The statistical confidence with odds of 95 out of 100 that the observed difference will hold up in investigations. The danger of accepting a statistical result as real when it is actually due only to error. the degree to which experimental results are taken seriously, the degree of faith that can be placed in the reality of the finding. The investigator can have 95% confidence that the sample mean actually differs from the population mean, and if the probability is low, the null hypothesis is improbable, and that all of these things are different ways of saying the same thing. And my author said, well, they're all false, but no, the last one, all of these are different ways of saying the same thing. They kind of are. But what they're saying, the wrong thing is that the probability of the hypothesis given the evidence has been determined by the probability of the evidence given the hypothesis. They flip that around, just like the prosecutor's fallacy, just like you would do with the rain in the clouds, just like the elephant and other four-legged animals. It's really no different. And each of these, and part of what we're going to do on our 2-day deal is I can explain to you how that happened, why they needed that to happen, and it's done to support a view of science that has lost how science validates. Science finds validation through the predictive strength of its models. And the statistics that uses null hypothesis significance testing, we call them frequent, is the non-Bayesian side that's held such sway in the academic world. That crew believes that only data can have probability, that a hypothesis can't have probability, that a hypothesis has to have, and all assertions are either true or false. And that is part of that, the greatest unforced error in the history of thought. Scientific models validate with their predictive strength. That's it, exclusively. One fallacy, and my plan would be to teach this to kids, start early, and you could come up with 2 or 3 examples every week and just wait for them to find it. I think we've got an inverse fallacy problem here, or inverse conditional fallacy. We can teach kids to do that. I don't know of another way to get people to feel what they ought to feel when they see p-values. Check this out. Here's what Guy Wasserstrom is head of the American Statistical Association. For example, no p-value can reveal the plausibility, presence, truth, or importance of an association or effect. Therefore, a label of statistical significance does not mean or imply that an association or effect is highly probable, real, true, or important. Nor does a label of statistical non-significance lead to the association or effect being improbable, absent, false, or unimportant. What he's telling you, there's no scientific information there. One way to look at this is like this. When you're looking at the probability of data on assumed hypotheses, you're doing statistics. When you talk about the probability of a hypothesis given data, we're trying to do science. The statistics is a tool for science, but we're not there until we start talking about the probability of a hypothesis. And that and the predictive strength and the idea of prediction, we're just going to beat into you over a weekend so that whether you were really paying close attention or not, you leave with something. I mean, look at this stuff on prediction we have. I think this is fun. Tell me if a pattern emerges here. A model with weak predictions might make, these are all from my father's work. A model with weak predictions might make remarkable predictions, but the conditions under which the predictions might come to pass might be impossible to achieve. The goal of science is to predict, implying that a process is under observation. Scientific method must insist that theories be capable of validation through prediction, and the theory itself be based on some non-empty data set. Explanation is in the eye of the beholder, but the power in science and its explanatory strength is its ability to predict. Like all scientific endeavors, the predictions won't be certain, just probable. Try to reconcile that, the idea that like all scientific endeavors, the predictions won't be certain but just probable. Try to reconcile that with the view that a hypothesis can't have probability. And they actually admit to that. That's the interesting thing. They brag about it. They just tell you outright, it has no meaning. Probability of hypothesis does not have meaning. Science can be neither, I love this, science can be neither teleological nor atheistic until someone can develop a model with theological hypotheses, use it to predict, and validate the results. Science is secular and needs a secular definition. Science relies on its models to predict novel facts, assuming the cause and effect principles as an axiom. I've got like 8 pages of these, and we're going to put them all up on the wall on little placards. It's a neat experience, but there's a powerful takeaway there. You hearing it? Prediction. Science is only good, it has predictive strength. So what's my interest in someone in the public health space that has a model that's predicting, name a calamity. And so how would I evaluate the model?
Can you use it to predict?
Until it predicts something, it's not yet a scientific model. It has to have found success predicting something. Now, it may be that we don't believe it, and it turned out it was true, and it did predict something, but until it does, you have no obligation. And in fact, we're at a point where you should be skeptical of almost any scientific proclamation. Richard Smith, 30-year editor of New England Journal of Medicine, said we've come to a point where you need to assume that every study you see is fraudulent unless you have other evidence to suggest otherwise. They found that a good chunk of clinical trials never took place. You heard about this? Never took place. Universities that don't exist, faculty that don't exist, just made up bullshit. Okay, I've taken enough of your time. Thank you.